Well, welcome back for the second video here, and you can go ahead and pull up your PowerPoint presentation on church-state relations. And I'm not going to go through every slide on here. I'll try to keep it moving and go over important things as we go. And so we'll go ahead to the second slide, which is the church-state controversies initiated through the 14th Amendment. The two big cases right here that are mentioned are Everson versus Board of Education, 1947. It's the first case really where you have dealt with the Establishment Clause and the wall of separation. And the wall of separation is not in the Constitution proper, but you can find it in some of the writings, Jefferson types of things that are out there. The second big case is Lemon versus Kurtzman, 1971. And what these cases did is that they showed that government action, in other words, the use of religious prayers, items, those types of things, that the government must have it must be for a secular purpose. It can't have the primary effect of either advancing or impeding religion, and it also has to avoid excessive entanglement. And so we'll go to the next one. Is you have these tests. One of them was the Lemon test, and I would encourage you to use the Google Scholar for those two cases, the Everson and Lemon, to look at specifically the story behind the case, so to speak. But the first test is the coercion test. That what you're doing must direct or indirectly coerce an individual to profess a faith. Had a couple instances that I've dealt with where one particular case I had a speaker come in for when I was a principal that had pre-approved speaker, pre-approved topics, nothing religious, supposed to be more along the good character, morality types of things, but halfway through what he was saying, he began to proselytize to the kids, and so he was doing two speeches and two different classes, and I had to pull him aside afterwards and say, that you can't do that, and you can't add that, So he had to make sure he made those changes. Also attended a graduation one time where the parents of a child who had died, who was supposed to be part of the graduation class at that school, the parents gave the speech and begin to go into professing faith. Basically said, I know we're not supposed to talk about this, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. And the funny thing is, I had the school attorney sitting beside me up on the stage, and we were just making some comments to ourselves. Very uncomfortable. We couldn't stop it, but it really would have been in violation of the law. Wisconsin versus Yoder, one of the early cases, talks about, this is one of those things where, you have free exercise. You have the religious beliefs of the Amish that children shouldn't go to school after 8th grade, and yet the state law said they had to go to school till they're 16. Well, it went to the Supreme Court, and the Yoder won, and so their faith could there would have been excessive entanglement, so to speak, that we had before, so that was overturned. I'm just going to into Engel versus Vitale is a big one here. Supreme Court prohibited schools from sponsoring Bible reading and prayer. Going to the next slide, Wallace versus Jaffrey, big Supreme Court case. Supreme Court only had an opinion on dealing with Alabama silent prayer law under the Establishment Clause, and validated it. Silent prayer statutes, Borden versus school district. I'll let you look at that one on your own. the next slide is another one I'll let you look at, Brown versus Gilmore. And the next slide, Lee versus Wiseman. And this is a case that basically validated the ability of a principal to invite clergy to give an invocation at a graduation ceremony. So going back, Lee versus Wiseman, Lemon versus Kurtzman, and Engel versus Vitale are the three biggies that you need to look at, because all three had an impact, made changes on how the judicial Supreme Court ruled on prayer or religion in schools. The next slide deals with select student elections to authorize prayers. Talk about student-led expression at a school event, not private speech. Prayers by a student at a graduation, for example, as long as it's not known by the school, it's spontaneous. It has to be a student. It must be spontaneous. Are the only examples of school prayer that are allowable. It's when you run into trouble when you know that student's going to get up there and say a prayer. So you've got to be very careful with those two. It's got to be spontaneous. Next slide, Chandler versus James. I'm just going to let you look at that one. Next slide is Pledge of Allegiance, using the words under God. I'll let you look at that one. Doesn't violate the Establishment Clause. Pledge of Allegiance does not. Religious displays. I'll let you look at the various cases we have there. Next slide is what I talked about just a little while ago, proselytization in the classroom. It does allow for the teaching Bible as a literacy, or literary reasons. So Bible as literature, so to speak. Equal access for religious groups. That changed about, I think it was 2001. Well, the more clarification of that in 2001. There's the Equal Access Act of 1984. That if you go into the two slides from now, it talks about Lamb's Chapel versus Cinder Union, and the one that was just the most recent one was the Good News Club, which allowed churches to use school buildings when they're not being used for educational purposes here, and as a result, you've seen a high increase of schools being used as a place of worship on Sundays or Saturdays, depending on which day it is. Going on to the next slide, I'll let you read that one. Accommodations for religious beliefs is a pretty important thing. That's important not only for students but for employment. If you have employees that have particular faith that they have to do, a Muslim religion type of thing. Going to the next slide, I'll let you look at that one. The next slide, religious challenges to secular curriculum. The biggest one is the Scopes versus State Tennessee. Scopes monkey trials, what they called it, was known for. You've had other things here. Up north somewhere, there was a case where school districts were changing to a creationism type of a different approach to that. That was struck down. So those are the real challenges that we've dealt with church state. And the next couple slides get into private schools, state aid to private schools, state funding. And if the second slide deals specifically, talks about religious doctrine could be attributed to government aid when it is distributed based on a secular criteria. Number two, it's non-discriminatory in manner, and number three, flows to religious schools only because of private choices by parents. Then your last two slides here are really getting into vouchers, and that's been the biggest thing to show up here in the last 10 years is vouchers. There's been a growing energy, I guess, to see vouchers, to use state monies to go with a child to a private education of some sort, whether it's religious based or not religious based. So that concludes the presentation for this chapter here. I do have one question for you. I'd like you to include in your email to me, which is it provide me one example at your school where something you've observed, whether it be a athletic banquet, there's a prayer given there, or at your graduation or a school board meeting, something that you've questioned whether that might be something that could be in violation, and just to provide me an example in an email for that. And it may or may not be. It gets into the fact that if it's not been ruled by the courts, or if somebody doesn't complain about it, sometimes people will do it. It just has to be corrected once it's been observed. So that concludes chapter 3. I think I said 2, but it's the second video conclusion. Thank you very much.